for the better part of 8 years, and now I'm not. Today, we're talking about The Wrestler, the 2008 drama directed by Darren Aronofsky, starring Mickey Rourke, and with supporting performances by Marisa Tomei and Evan Rachel Wood. High-level plot summary: Rourke plays an aging professional wrestler who 20 years earlier was a headliner, but now barely ekes out a living performing on the New Jersey circuit. Hijinks ensue. At Rotten Tomatoes, the Tomato Meter score is 98%, and the critics' consensus reads, Mickey Rourke gives a performance for the ages in The Wrestler, a richly affecting, heart-wrenching, yet ultimately rewarding drama. Here on Below the Line, we're not focused on what the critics thought, but once again, the reviews are dead on for this movie. It's an amazing film and well worth your time. We're continuing our series of episodes focused on the property department, and my guests today are the props team from this film. First, property master Jeff Butcher. Jeff, welcome to Below the Line.
Hello.
Jeff, you've been working in props for more than 30 years, and you've been a property master on, tell me if this is still correct, 36 feature films. What are you working on now?
37. I'm working on a television show called Katie Keene, which is a spinoff of Riverdale, which is based on Archie comics. You know, it's 4 young people trying to make it in New York. It's sort of like Fame meets Friends, I guess. I don't know, something like that.
Jeff, I will watch for that. Thanks for joining us today. Next, returning to the show is Dan Fisher, who worked as the assistant property master on The Wrestler. Dan, if Below the Line was a bar, you'd be considered a regular by now. Welcome back.
Glad to be back, Skid. I feel like now I can just call you Skid without feeling awkward about it or anything. I'm becoming like the David Brenner of your podcast.
Dan, I'm glad we got you over the hump on you're calling me Skid now. It's less confusing to our viewers. So I know that you and Jeff first met back when you were both production assistants in 1986 on Matewan. Tell me a little about your shared history.
Our shared history is that, that was my first job. I don't think it was Jeff's. We both started out as set dressing production assistants. He wound up going with props. And then, we did that job together. And then when that job was done, I had to figure out what to do next. I was still living in West Virginia at the time. And Jeff said, hey, I've got an apartment in New York and we need a roommate. So I moved to New York in the autumn of '86. And we lived together for 4 years and have been friends for 33 years.
Well, I want to talk more about the stuff you've done together, but first, let's get back to The Wrestler. And listeners should consider this their spoiler warning. Let's start with the filming logistics. I mentioned earlier that the film is set in New Jersey. Is this where you actually filmed?
Yes. The film was shot almost entirely in New Jersey. We shot at veterans organizations and VFWs and that kind of thing. Wherever they would normally hold wrestling events, we sort of crashed their events with arrangements, and we would film around actual wrestling nights.
Well, my memory is a little different. Correct me, Jeff. I had thought that we actually put on the wrestling events. Am I wrong about that? That my thought was we filmed every Saturday night for about 4 or 5 weeks straight. We worked Saturdays, and we would put on a show. The deal was people got to come in for free, with the caveat that you then watch Mickey Rourke do his scenes, and you have to clap and really participate. And I thought it was really genius of production. Whoever came up with the idea, to keep the quote unquote background pumped for these fictional wrestling episodes, we'd have real wrestlers, which is also fiction actually, but we'd have real wrestlers come in between and do their thing, put on shows. And that just kept the audience engaged. And then we got that engagement on our film. But maybe you're right and I'm wrong. Maybe it was all we were part of this local scene.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether they were entirely put on by us or we were making arrangements with existing ones and joining them. But it was, they were real wrestlers, so-called real wrestlers would wrestle, and then we would, Mickey would do a scene, or Mickey's stand-in would do a scene, and then we'd go back to another wrestling match. And that was how they kept the audience pumped.
Yeah, and also too, we used a lot of those in between scene wrestlers as little bit parts. He'd come backstage, and it'd be like, "Great show tonight, Ram," and things like that. And I thought those guys were great. That they weren't actors, they weren't people putting on the costumes and doing an affectation. They were just themselves.
Yeah, now it's amazing that Darren was able to get the performances he did out of all those non-actors. The scene at the beginning where Mickey is in the locker room backstage and he's just talking to the actual wrestlers. it was all good stuff. It was all Mickey improvising and, with non-actors and Darren figuring out how to, place that handheld camera where it was all came off very realistically.
So you guys have mentioned a couple of things. You're talking about handheld cameras. You're talking about a lot of improvisation. Tell me more about working with Darren Aronofsky. How does he run his set? What does he do to collect the film that he does?
Well, one thing I remember is that very early on, Darren told Jeff and myself, I don't want director's chairs on this set. I don't want a video village. Because if Mickey wants to make a sudden right-hand turn that we didn't expect, I want the camera to follow him, and I don't want to see a bunch of producers staring at a monitor behind him. So it was clear to us we were not supposed to bring director's chairs on our truck nor set them up. And Darren, actually, for his monitor, he had what was called a clamshell. It's a very small video wireless unit that he wore with a strap around his neck. And he would be by the camera watching the actor with his eyes, but he would also look down to see what the shot was doing. And I thought that was an incredible technique that a lot of directors should adopt.
Something you mentioned that folks, some of our listeners might not know, but yes, there's all these chairs on set, these director's chairs for various folks. And you guys have been doing this long enough, maybe you know some of the history. That has become the responsibility of the prop department to provide these chairs on a lot of sets. There could be 10 to 15 chairs there in some sets that I've been on.
I just worked on a Spielberg job, and Spielberg has his own tent with his own, it's called a Hollywood chair, which is, it weighs about a ton, and it's very padded and heavy, in his own tent, with a little fan and stuff. And then there's the producer village, where there's another, 14 chairs, Tony Kushner surrounded by, 14 writers, producers, and visitors. And every day a list of guests. Today we're going to have 4 guests because we have 4 more chairs out. It's a full-time job. Just then they move the camp. First of all, they set it up in the wrong place to begin with every day, and then it has to move all day. So yeah, it's kind of ridiculous.
No, we could do an entire episode about nothing but the politics of director's chairs. On my cruise, I have had times where I brought on an extra prop person for the job that we have to move tents and chairs a bunch of times a day, and we have so many chairs that has justified the expense of an additional person. I did a job one time where the director had 4 kids that were coming in on location for a few days. And they're like, well, you have to have chairs for all the kids, and their names have to be printed on the back of their seat backs. And this was like one of those we have no money jobs. So, I'm skimping on my prop budget, but we have to have each of those kids' names on the back of the chair. And of course the kids aren't going to sit in chairs. Kids don't sit in chairs. Kids run around. That's what they do. So yeah, anyway, it's all part of the game. We play it.
Well, we'll save a deeper chair discussion for another episode, as you suggest, Dan. But for now, I want to talk more about wrestling matches. Specialized props aside, what are you responsible for providing on a big match like that?
Well, for the wrestling matches, Mickey had to get taped up before every match, and he would request a airplane bottle of Jack Daniels that because wrestlers will drink that much Jack Daniels before a match to improve the vascularity of their veins, he would say. I think he really was drinking it for the vascularity of his veins, not because of for any other reason, even though he was, a hardcore motherfucker. And then, we had to, with his trainer, we had to supply his weights. He would always pump up before doing anything. Yeah, I mean, in general, that's what we would provide for all the bouts. And then there were specific props to different matches.
Well, let's dive into some of those. And I know specifically one that looked very prop heavy was when Ram is fighting, I think, a character named Necro. And the match itself is extremely violent. First of all, breakaway chairs. There were a bunch of those. Is there a place that sells breakaway chairs just for movies or for movies and wrestling? Like, where did you guys get that kind of prop?
I think we got that. It was like a rubber chair that looked like a regular folding chair, but it was soft. And I don't remember where that was made, or if we got that from like a wrestling supply place, or where that came from. I don't remember.
Was that maybe more from like ISS or something, Jeff? Because at that time, too, I mean, there were fewer places for custom manufactured props than there are today, especially in the New York area. I mean, now in New York, there are a couple of places that will custom make you anything. But at that time, I think there was ISS and then there was Alfonso's Breakaway Glass, both in LA. So you would have to order this stuff ahead of time so that you'd get it by the time you needed to shoot it.
Yeah, I don't remember. I do remember there was a wrestler who was sitting down after all the wrestlers had left, who was still sitting there holding like an ice pack over his bleeding head. And I asked him, how many times have you been hit in the head with a folding chair? And I think he said 350. And then he mentioned that he had a degree in business economics, which is curious career choice to get hit in the head repeatedly with a chair.
If you don't mind, I want to segue this because Jeff was talking about somebody willingly taking a certain amount of pain for the sake of the act. And the Necro Butcher, and you might be leading to this anyway, Skid, but the Necro Butcher had part of his act was to take a dollar bill, put it to his forehead, and staple it to his forehead. And it's like, well, how did the prop department do it? The question is, the prop department handed him the staple gun.
No, those were staples that had been in alcohol.
Okay, they had been in alcohol, and they were what, 1/4-inch staples, Jeff? Or,
yeah, 1/4-inch staples.
Well, this is what I do remember, and this might be one of those Rashomon episodes, Skid. But what I do remember, I was talking to the Necro Butcher between takes. I asked him, so what do you do? You're actually stapling a dollar bill to your skull. Like, how do you not get brain damage from that? And he said, oh, well, the human skull is 3/8 inch thick. And as long as we use 1/4-inch staples, we're good.
Yeah, he did that when we went to Philadelphia the first time, which is where we shot that hardcore wrestling match with all the barbed wire and everything. He did several takes where he stapled the $5 bill to his forehead. We went back weeks later for him to do it again. I don't know if that was the sole purpose of going back to Philadelphia, but they didn't like the way it looked when they did it the first time. So they did a couple more takes of him, and it still wasn't looking right. And he wanted to practice one, like without the camera rolling. And I had to explain to him that, no, we're going to roll. Yeah, he had to have done it. I mean, he does it as part of his act. So he's probably done it hundreds of times, but he did it for us at least 6 times.
Now, also in that match, you mentioned the barbed wire. There's barbed wire. There's broken glass. Are those prop items? Are you guys are bringing the barbed wire that they're going to use, or the glass? Or tell me more about just the various props in that.
The barbed wire was fake. It's plastic. The breakaway glass was all fake, except there's a point where Mickey's stunt double is launched back into like a 4x8 sheet of tempered glass that's in the corner of the ring. And when he goes through it, it's detonated by a charge. But he's still jamming his back into the turnbuckle with the tempered glass in between. And so he had to go to the hospital for some stitches. And then there were also the tables they crashed through. They fall off ladders and crash through tables. Then the scenes when Necro Butcher staples a dollar bill to his forehead, that was real. But then he turns and he staples Mickey a bunch of times in the chest. That was fake. They added those staples in post. And we had a bunch of thumbtacks when they land on the table. They were real thumbtack heads where we had cut off the metal part and put in a little plastic pointy part. And then ended up with those, working with the makeup department. Judy Chen was the makeup artist, who's a genius. But we worked with her to, affix those staple heads to Mickey, in the scenes where they get pulled out and stuff.
He gets him with a fork at some point in that match. Again,
yeah, Mickey had a problem with and Mickey had a problem with it because I didn't have a rubber or plastic fork. I had a fork where I just kind of dulled down the tines. Is that what you call them? And Mickey really wasn't having it. He was not happy about that. I guess we let him down on that one.
Trash can. I mean, you got to choose somebody gets hit with a trash can. Again,
well, that was
at this point, right? That's not just set dressing.
That was props, and the way that worked was like, okay, we're going to shoot this scene in 10 minutes. Quickly, let's fill it up. So we filled it up with newspaper and packaging and this kind of stuff. And I went and I showed it to Necro Butcher and said, this is what Mickey's going to dump on you. It's like, and then we had some time. So he added like pizza crusts and hot dogs and mustard and ketchup and stuff like that. And then neglected to let Necro Butcher know. So when it got dumped on it, he was surprised that there was a little bit more in there than just paper and stuff.
I think that was my job that day to like, fish, quick, go around all the trash cans, find pizza crust, find soda cups, whatever. Find the shittiest stuff and throw it in there.
So you didn't have to reset that one. It sounds like you shot that one once.
I think that was a one take, as I recall. And I watched it the other night, and that was the other one where suddenly it's use my leg. We didn't, the prosthetic leg thing was absolutely off the cuff. That when we showed up to work that day, there was a veteran there, and somehow the idea came up that Mickey should use his leg. And
that was so funny too.
We had nothing to do with it, but it was, yeah.
It was so funny in the movie too, where the crowd, I don't know if Darren just told them to, or they did it on their own, where the crowd starts chanting, use the leg. Use the leg. It's great in the movie.
I was going to ask about the artificial leg. So that wasn't scripted. You didn't come in with an artificial leg. There just happened to be a guy in the background with an artificial leg.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing, too, where if they had written that, we would have had to probably spend $15,000 or go to ridiculous lengths to try to get some prosthetic leg company to allow us to use their leg or loan us a leg or something. And so the fact that it was as simple as it was great. But also, I kind of cringe when he uses the leg, because of those things are so valuable and so critical, that like, what are we doing? But it wasn't our idea.
I seem to remember, Jeff, that there was a certain amount of improv throughout that whole movie of somebody has an idea, quick, let's get it, let's do it. Because I would occasionally, like in the middle of the day, just jump in the car and drive down the Jersey Turnpike to get something. I remember, like, especially in the mornings, Mickey would come in the morning and say, I've got this idea, I want this thing. And a couple of times I would just get in the car and drive until I got it.
But I think partly that was Mickey's trick of, I need another minute to go over my lines and stuff. So he would ask for kind of an obscure prop to try to buy some time.
One day he was like, I want to drink a Coke in the scene, but it has to be in a glass bottle. And at that time, I think Coke only put out glass bottle Coke at Christmas, and we weren't filming it around Christmas. I think I did find it somewhere, and by the time I got back, of course, that scene was shot.
Yeah.
When we were talking about the violent match, there was one other thing that occurred to me, and there's a lot of stuff in that scene. And some of it improv, as you said, but just a ton of stuff to keep track of.
We had an additional prop with us in Philadelphia, the late, great Dave McCall, but he was really there just to lend a hand. Tim Grimes, the production designer, I know he was all over, the hand props. There's a clip on YouTube of all of us working on one of those scenes, and he's in the ring, moving stuff around. And I know, like, there's the breakaway window that Mickey crashes over Necro Butcher's head. That was put together by the set dressing department because they had better access to window frames than we did. Yeah, I mean, it was a collaborative effort, between the art department and us.
Darren, especially at that time, the wrestler, I remember Jeff called me prior to my working with him on this, and he said, hey, would you want to work on a low-budget wrestling movie with Mickey Rourke, who was as cold as could be at that time in terms of his career? I was like, I don't know. I might want to do something that makes me some money. And he said it was with Darren Aronofsky, so of course I did it. But, it was still a low-budget film. I don't know what tier it was in terms of our pay scale, but it was a low-budget movie, so you do need that collaborative effort. You do need to lean on the other departments if you want to get the job done. I love working on low-budget movies for that reason, too, that there does become a familial atmosphere that it's like I can come to somebody and say, hey, could you help me do this? Or, you're just working so intimately with the camera crew because certain gags have to come in and out of that long take at certain times. So you really work together in a way that you don't always do on the bigger stuff.
So, and we've talked about it on the show before, where particularly in a low budget situation, the crew really comes together. You felt on this set that folks did come together. Does Darren run a set that encourages the crew to be collaborative and work together, particularly in these low-budget situations?
It's funny, the idea that I think Darren does run that set, but it's not like I don't know. I mean, I was going to say it's not like a touchy-feely environment, but in a sense it is. At the beginning of all his movies, the entire crew stands in a circle and holds hands. and he says a few words.
Do you remember what he said at the circle? Because I do.
Of course I don't.
He said, as we formed our circle, he said, I just want to tell you, I consider Mickey Rourke the greatest actor on this planet, and I want to give him a movie to show the rest of the world how great he really is. And also, I do know, because I had read about it somewhere, he had opportunities to make The Wrestler like a year or two prior with Nicolas Cage in the main part for a lot more money. And he turned it down. He said, no, this is Mickey's movie. I wrote it for Mickey. I'm going to independently finance this. And he did. And so I think you can't help but be affected by that.
But I think partly what I was going to say earlier is I don't feel like he necessarily cultivates an atmosphere of collaboration, but I think he does. I think, but it's sort of like, here we go, hold on. It's and we're all kind of running behind, trying to keep up. Darren, more than any director that I've worked with, has an absolute clear vision on pretty much exactly what he wants to do, and there's very little hesitance. So you kind of have to, keep up.
Yeah, and I actually was Darren's prop master for his next movie, Black Swan. And it was a very different approach, both the way we filmed it and I think even how the set was run than The Wrestler, because that was a much more formal movie. Yeah, there were the trademark handheld following behind the shoulders shots, but there was a lot more sort of formality to the movie because of the subject. It's ballet versus wrestling, which is much more down and dirty. But just the cinematic style. And I think that in a certain way that affected the interaction. And Darren is I mean, he not only is convinced he's the smartest person in the room, he really is. He's the smartest person in pretty much any room he will enter. In general, you want to please the director. We're all here to give the director his or her vision. But in the case of Darren, I at least, and I know Jeff did too, you really respect that vision. And you're just going to bust your ass to help him get it. And he is very specific. And you try as hard as you ever will in your life to give him what he's asking for.
Let me ask you guys about what he asked for, what you provided in some other scenes in the movie. There's a scene where the wrestlers are signing materials. That's a lot of material. Set dressing provide a lot of that, or are you guys supposed to come up with all these videotapes and posters and things like that for a scene?
Most of that came from set dressing. We provided his, he had a Polaroid camera that he took pictures with some people with. I had that one of those photographs of that he took of the Polaroid in my set box for years. Finally, it fell apart. But yeah, that was almost all them. There was a former wrestler had a urine bag that was kind of fills up on cue that we had to work during that scene that Mickey notices and is saddened by. But most of the memorabilia, the stuff that was on the tables, all that came from the art department.
And is that wrestler, he's in a wheelchair as well, right? Is that, you guys provide the wheelchair? So he's an actor, not a real wrestler, former wrestler in a wheelchair, or you might not remember specifically who was in it, but you guys propped all of that out, it sounds like.
I don't remember whether we provided the wheelchair or not. Do you, Dan?
I don't. We probably had a wheelchair with us just in case to cover our asses, but there was so much verisimilitude on that set. Real people in wheelchairs, real whatevers, that it wouldn't have surprised me if it was just his wheelchair. But you did that urine bag gag. You were the one, I think, doing that with a hypodermic in a tube.
Yeah, I think like an oversized syringe. Yeah,
syringe. Yeah.
Well, while we're talking about meds, similarly, there's a scene later in a bathroom where Mickey Rourke's character is using cocaine. How do you put a prop like that together?
We used inositol or inositol. I like to pronounce it inositol because it's cocaine. But it's the world's most popular cocaine cut. It's a vitamin B derivative, I guess. And it gives you a slight energy lift, but it's otherwise, very easy to use, the way you use cocaine.
Yeah, that's what I use too. I've had entire drug lab scenes in other movies and shows where I just order that stuff by like the 5-gallon bucket to have big piles of fake coke for actors to jam their faces in.
And to be clear, Jay, that's what you use as well. It means what you use in propping other movies, not what you're using for a little kick on set.
No, not me. But no, so I learned it because I stole it from Jeff. Like once I learned, oh, that's what we use for fake cocaine. That's what Jeff uses. I'll use it too. And so much of what I've done in my career has been because, well, Jeff did it, I'll do it too.
Well, still on the props front, but let's change tracks. Talk to me about strip club scenes. Marisa Tomei plays a stripper that Mickey Rourke's character is attempting to have a relationship with. How do you prop a strip club scene?
I learned another good lesson from Jeff on that, which is when you do a strip club scene and you're handing out money to give to the background to stuff into the dancers' various articles of clothing, don't give them fake money. Get from the accounting department the day before, so get like $100 worth of singles and hand those out. Even though it's real money and you're going to lose, let's say, $30 out of that 100. It's better than having a bunch of background people walking around with stolen fake money that say motion picture use only, that they are going to stupidly try to use in a store, get caught, and blame you. It's much better to go with the $30 loss. And I've done that in strip club scenes ever since. And unfortunately, like every other show I've done has a strip club scene.
Unfortunately.
Well, I just get tired of seeing also not only the strip club scenes are done, period. I don't, whatever, but they're always done so badly. But that's a whole other podcast. They're all
not this one, though.
Well, not this one. This one was done very well, but we didn't fall prey to the cliche of them all wearing bikinis and doing these elaborate waterfalls and stunts. It was like strip clubs, which I have been to recreationally. Really are. That's what they're like.
I thought Marissa's performance was great. I thought that, you really felt that this is where she worked and this is who she was.
Yeah, she was robbed. I know she got nominated. I can't remember who won, but man, she was good.
Now you talk about the money handout. I'm imagining there are drinks, there are trays, there are other just sort of large amounts of prop material that you guys need to provide for these scenes.
Like any bar scene, what you normally do is just go in and use the glassware that's in the bar for the most part, unless they if somebody's written martini and they don't have martini glasses, we just use what's there. And we mix drinks out of soda, mostly from the soda, the fountain. And we bring in non-alcoholic beer and, grape juice or fake wine for wine. Yeah. And then we have rubber ice for so people can have ice without it making noise during filming.
Yeah. And those kind of scenes, that's where I'm usually busy, very busy. Jeff might not be as busy. He might be setting up the big props, the main things. Whereas me and what was our guy's name? Clay? Was Clay?
Yeah. It was Owen.
Owen. Yeah. Owen and I would be the ones like just, doing dozens of glasses with the rubber ice and filling, just doing creative combinations to make interesting colors. And this looks like bourbon, but it's really watered down Coke or whatever. That would keep us busy all day. And of course, background being background, sometimes they'd like drink it all up and be like, "Can I have more?" It's like, no. Craft service.
Not your waiter.
Well, talk to me about another scene as well that caught my eye. There's a supermarket deli counter where Ram works to make money when he's not wrestling. I read online that Mickey Rourke served real customers, but I'm wondering how that works for you guys between props, set dressing, and actual real food. How'd that work?
We used mostly what was in the deli counter. I remember, I watched that scene recently. There was some business with a rotisserie chicken, and there was some business with some potato salad that he ends up throwing to a customer. And that was those were real customers that that Mickey just served. And I don't know if they even knew that they were, that he was Mickey Rourke or what was going on. The best bit from our memory from that bit was the meat cutter scene where he cuts his thumb. The visual effects makeup guys who I just worked with again on Jarmusch's The Dead Don't Die. They're absolutely brilliant, just great artists for special effects makeup. But the at that time they weren't quite as savvy when it came to mechanical makeup effects. And when they showed up that morning, they said, "Do you have any plastic tubing?" Now this is the scene where Mickey Rourke is supposed to have blood spurting from his thumb after he's cut it in the meat slicer. if you're showing up that morning looking for rubber tubing, you're going to have a bad day. And they really did, because it was something like 13 takes where he's supposed to cut his thumb in the meat slicer and the camera follows him all the way out to the parking lot and he gets in his car and it's supposed to be spurting blood the whole time. And by take 13, it still wasn't happening. And Mickey, at one point, he turns to somebody on the crew. He says, "See that guy over there?" And he points to me and he goes, "He's bringing it. You guys, you're not bringing it." And the makeup, the visual effects makeup guy got upset and he quit. And then like 30 seconds later he was back, and they eventually got it. But it was really a rough day. And I had it easy. There's a little bit of a thing in the making of on the DVD with the meat slicer where Darren is explaining what he wants. It's like, I don't want it to be a spray as much as like finer than that. And I say, like a mist? He goes, yeah, like a mist. But the thing was, all I had to do was lay on the ground under the meat slicer with a paint sprayer with blood in it. And at the right moment, just pull the trigger and just squirt, blood out of the Hudson sprayer. And it looked like it was coming out of the meat grind. It was the most easiest low budget special effect in the world, but I ended up looking like a hero, and these guys who are really doing hard and beautiful work didn't come out looking so good that day, but I think their work looks great in the film.
They've come a long way. Yeah, they worked with us on Black Swan. They're great guys, and yeah,
amazingly talented.
But so much has changed too since 2008 when we made this, in terms of so much was expected of prop people and effects people in terms of being able to conjure practical on-set effects, that nowadays it just be like, well, we'll put it in post, blood is post, even gunshots now, where there's so much less, and I know this is straying, but there's so much less emphasis now on like, well, you have to bring blanks and all this stuff. It's like, no, just bring a gun, we'll put the flash and the smoke in post. It's safer and it's quicker and easier. So it's the expectations in 2008 were so much higher on us. There's sort of more experimenting necessary to the process than there is now.
Well, you couldn't make a mistake. Nowadays, if something isn't perfect, they can clean it up in post. But back then, it's like, if you didn't get it, you didn't get it.
Well, yeah, and with those long takes too, as you explained with Darren. And I don't think Darren was a yeller. Do you? But when he was unhappy, it was palpable. It was like when your dad is mad in the house, and your dad may not be a yeller, but boy, it when dad is not happy. And I remember how unhappy he was that day.
The thing was, I remember him snapping his fingers at a grip because he wanted his apple box so he could sit down and get a better view of what was going on. And I remember thinking, you're going to get punched in the nose, But then I realized that he is so committed to doing great work. He is so, behind the project that you really can't help but get behind that. And you forgive him a lot because you understand he's being short or whatever he's doing, that where he could, his behavior could be better. It's really all toward making the greatest movie he can make. And that's why we're there. So you can't really fault him. But I think he's also, he's not a bad guy. He's a bit single-minded sometimes. And but again, it's toward why we're all there. So it's forgivable.
And the proof is up on the screen. By and large, even when his movies have not been 100% successful, they've been audacious, and there's been nothing like them. And sometimes they've been freaking great. I think The Wrestler is his best movie.
Well, I want to ask about some hero props that I think you guys probably coordinated with Darren in advance of filming, but tell me if anything odd came up. Comes to mind, there's a Nintendo video game system where they're playing Wrestle Jam 88. It's got the Ram character in it. It's got I forget if it's the Sheik character, whoever his major match. How do you get something like that prepared in advance?
We bought the Nintendo, and the art department did the hard part. We had nothing to do with the playback. And I don't know if the gameplay was actually interactive or if it was just a video and they were playing as if they were playing it.
I remember it as being just a video, and it might have been Mike Syme or one of those people. Mike Syme is a guy that does like all of the video and video screen effects and computer effects in the city these days. But nowadays, of course, that scene would have been done completely in post.
Huh. But I have to. There's a scene where Mickey wrestles with a bunch of kids, and my son Jake got to be one of those kids. And Mickey and Darren were talking, and Mickey, said of my son that he wanted him to play the part of the kid playing video games, or wished that he was, because he seemed real, and he said he looked like he was lit from the inside, which I thought was wonderful to hear. Yeah. So whenever I see that scene, I'm a little bit resentful that it's not my son he's playing video games with, but I'm glad that my son got to be in the movie. He's got his first paycheck there. It's up framed on the wall upstairs in the office.
What about the action figure that sits on Mickey's dashboard? He later gives it to Marisa Tomei for her child. Something you designed in advance for that? I think that's probably scripted.
That was scripted. That was a collaboration. Tim Grimes, the production designer, worked with, I think, our on-set scenic, and I'm going to embarrass myself by not remembering his name. The two of them worked that out together. And it was a little bit of a problem because it wasn't ready the first time he was supposed to play. So there's a scene inside the van where you're looking out the front windshield and the figure is on the dashboard in silhouette. And it's actually an entirely different action figure that we painted black and put there because we weren't ready.
But Tim Grimes, by the way, too, Tim started out in props. Tim, I think, still holds his 52 card. And wasn't Tim one of your assistants on something, Jeff?
Tim, my history with Tim is that I met him something like 15 or 20 years ago in an elevator when he was a production assistant, and he was talking about, I don't know if he was asking if he should work in the art department or work in the prop department or what he should do. And I told him he should work in the locations department because that way you can work your way up. You won't hit the glass ceiling that the prop department hits. And of course, he didn't listen to me, became a production designer and my boss. But then the movie right after The Wrestler, I went and did a movie in Detroit called Whip It that Drew Barrymore directed. And Tim was my assistant for that movie, which was kind of funny for him to go from being my boss production designer to the second prop on the next movie. He's a great guy. Great guy.
I did a job where he was a production designer, and I wound up getting fired because the director just didn't like me. And he couldn't have been sweeter. And Dan, it's not you, it's him, but here's your plane ticket. No shame in it. It was just a clash of personalities, let's just say.
Well, coming back to props, guys, I know on a normal set, props will provide watches and rings and other small things. In The Wrestler, Mickey Rourke wears a hearing aid. Is that something you guys brought a bunch in for him to try, or was it Darren who chose it in advance? Like, how'd the hearing aid come together? Or was that a prop for you guys to provide?
That was a prop. I don't remember providing options. Maybe we showed him pictures, but I just remember ordering. I think we bought those on eBay or something like that, and we had about 6 of them. Still got a couple kicking around here somewhere. And we dirtied him up. And the big challenge with that one was just remembering to stick it in his ear because he was supposed to have it all the time. And it's an easy, we're not used to hearing aids. So it was an easy thing to overlook.
And then tell me about the scene where Mickey Rourke takes a razor blade and puts it in his wrist guard. Later in the match, he uses it to cut his head. And just props, wardrobe, how does something like that come together? Because there's a lot of moving pieces on that one.
That one, we worked really hard to come up with the right double-edged razors that just looked cool. And then we bought several different pairs of scissors because he's in the scene, he's cutting the corner off the razor blade. And I'm, there kind of preparing the scene where he cuts it. And Mickey picked up one that I cut off as a test. And he said, "Oh, this is the one I'm going to use." And I went, what? Was kind of surprised because it was news to me that he was going to use a real blade. I think we had little plastic pieces for him to fake it, and which I was, preparing for him to tape into his, wrist. But he took one of the dulled, razor blades, the corners that I had cut off, and said he was going to use that. And I thought, do you not at least want to use a sharp razor blade if you're going to actually cut yourself? And I don't know whether he used a sharp blade or a dull blade. But I remember I was just doing my petty cash at the concession stand at the wrestling venue and thought, oh, I bet it's about time for Mickey to cut himself. And I just wandered over and behind the camera and looked. And sure enough, he just took the blade out and just cut an 1.5 inch long cut into his forehead. And that was all 100% real. It wasn't what we were planning, what we thought was going to happen. But that's what he decided to do, and that's what he did.
And the thing too that your listeners, I'm guessing that most of your listeners work in the business, or at least very, very interested in the business of making movies. But especially on low budget, on all movie sets, but especially low budget, and certainly in the case of The Wrestler, this was all done in a few seconds. Really, the time just flies, and you're in the moment, and everything's happening so fast. So one minute you're like, well, here's the rubber razor blade, and Mickey's going to take the rubber and he's going to pretend to cut himself, and the makeup person will come in and put a scar on, and we'll do all that, while the cameras are rolling. That changes in just a few seconds to, oh no, wait a minute, Mickey's just going to cut himself, and we're going to film that. It happens so quickly. Everything happens so quickly that you just have to go with it. You can't freak out. You have to accept what is given to you. And Jeff certainly did many times on this.
I don't know. I question my judgment about some of that, but I wanted to feel like I was supporting what they were trying to do. But they early on, the first AD, our first AD, we had a meeting and we were talking. I can't remember what we were talking about, but they were talking about doing things real. And that was his last day. He quit. He was like, I'm not going to be a part of this. This job's crazy. I don't think that he necessarily did the wrong thing. It's tough when you're in the position of having to support people like Mickey and Darren, who are, on this adventure to do something really great, but they are, they're people who want a lot of realism, and they like to break rules. And, and I don't want to be, I don't want to be a part of somebody getting hurt or something like that. But I also don't want to be the prop guy who's too timid to support them in trying to do, to be realistic. But there were a number of times on this where it was a real challenge to, because we were there to, fake it. And there was another scene where, I hear Darren say to Mickey, "Don't you think Jeff should sterilize that?" And I thought, oh, here we go. And, and it was, Mickey was supposed to get drunk and be in his trailer bathroom and take, and unscripted, take out a knife and start cutting himself. And the first thing was, get rid of this fake wine. And Mickey drank a bottle and a half of wine. And then next thing, he's cutting himself up in the mirror. And we did 2 takes, and they wrapped for the night. And Danielle, his trainer, and I worked on a boxing movie with John Leguizamo years ago. And when you're a prop master on a boxing movie, it's a lot like being a corner guy. You're the one putting the mouthpiece in and out, and you're the one imitating what the corner guys really do. And so, I'm shoving Vaseline into Mickey's cuts, and Danielle's cleaning them up, and Mickey's, says, "You got me drunk." And but he's having a great time. He's reliving his boxing days. I'm reliving my cornerman days. I'm not sure what Danielle was reliving, but it was a great moment. And at the end of the day, he was fine. But there were a number of times where it was, oh no, here we go.
Well, how did the other actors take to this environment? Marisa Tomei or Evan Rachel Wood? Any particular stories of their interaction with props, or are they just kind of in the orbit around this Darren and Mickey show?
Well, I mean, most of the insanity was Mickey alone or Mickey in the ring. The stuff with Marisa, and but I think they were Evan Rachel Wood and Marisa Tomei, I think were pretty much isolated from a lot of the insanity.
I've said a lot of times when I've talked about having worked on this movie that it's the closest I've ever come to having worked on a documentary. Mickey really, he didn't just do that. The thing is, the line between Randy the Ram and Mickey Rourke, there weren't really that many lines between them. I mean, if you think a second, the story of The Wrestler is about this guy who was big in the 80s, and then he kind of had a falling out, and then he had a chance to reappear and to become publicly prominent again. Well, that's the Mickey Rourke story too. That's exactly why I think Darren, as he said, he wanted to make the movie. He wanted to remind the world that Mickey was a great actor, and Mickey inhabited this role. I think it goes even beyond the Daniel Day-Lewis thing of everybody has to call you Abe Lincoln and all that stuff. I think that Mickey just saw himself as the Ram, and he really wasn't Mickey. And so much of this is, I'm going to just do these things because I want to experience what this really feels like, and then let my behavior be dictated by those feelings. And is it irresponsible in terms of a filmmaking point of view? Absolutely. I do. I think it's quite irresponsible. And I know there are actors who are capable of doing that without going to that means. But on the other hand, this is Mickey's movie. It was written for him, created for him. So you either go with it, you quit like the AD, or you stick around and you just try to keep your own sense of what's right and wrong as together as you can, and follow your principles. I will say, I don't mean to go on and on, but there is one other thing that we talked about earlier that I think was important to me, which was when we did that Philadelphia scene at that ring. Those were real wrestling fans. Philadelphia is a tough town. It's a lot. It's very blue collar. And so we had the audience there. There were kids there with mohawks. There were a lot of people dressed in camouflage and like "fuck you" shirts and all of this stuff. These were real. This is real American stuff going on. And these people, like during these wrestling matches, they were just screaming out the most vicious stuff. Their kids would be like, "Fuck you, asshole!" Dun 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 dun. Calling people the F word. It was really like being at, I don't want to be political here.
A Trump rally.
A Trump rally. A Trump rally on steroids, so to speak. And it personally, it upset me so much. I don't know if Jeff remembers this. There was a certain point I just had to walk away. I walked away from the set, and I just found a place that was like off a distance away. And I just hung out by myself and away from that noise and away from that atmosphere. I couldn't take it. It was too real for me. That much hatred, that much bloodthirstiness, especially when I saw the kids raising their middle fingers and calling people the F word. That was just too much for me.
Well, guys, this was a really intense film. It's clear from the stories you've told. But in service of this being a prop-focused episode, I want to take advantage of the history that you guys had. As I mentioned at the start, you guys have known each other for more than 30 years. You got a ton of credits between you, both separate and overlapping. From a props perspective, how did The Wrestler compare to other films you've worked on?
Yeah, I guess that the thing about The Wrestler was just the props in The Wrestler were, most of them that I remember revolve around wrestling. And so they were ridiculous things like, a crutch wrapped in barbed wire, or we had a pogo pony. What do you call that? A pony's head on a stick wrapped in barbed wire. And
hobby horse
wrapped in barbed wire, and a tennis racket, wrapped in barbed wire. And then a lot of these things didn't come into play, but it was just, that was the kind of, it's this hardcore wrestling that they do in Philadelphia where, they do this kind of stuff and they're not using fake barbed wire. It was just strange to be involved in, these instruments of destruction. And aside from those props, I'm just trying to remember what the props were. I remember Owen Lamb, at one point, I guess Mickey was shaving. This is probably a scene that didn't make in the movie. At the last second, we needed a razor that he could be shaving with, and you can't really just keep using a razor over and over again. So Owen, instantly removed the blades and found little steel rods to replace the blades that would roll as you shaved with it. And I don't even know if he made a movie, but I was like, this is an amazingly talented prop person who's able to do this so quickly and so perfectly. One prop that stands out is in the scene where Mickey does the lap dance for Marisa. She chugs a whole beer, and Marisa couldn't chug a whole beer. So we gave her a beer bottle full of water. And unfortunately, it was a green bottle, and you can kind of tell that it's water. And I was watching the movie with my very good friend in Minnesota, and that scene was going on, and somebody in the audience went, "That's water."
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, too, there are some movies, you get an offer for a job, they send you a script, and you read that script. And besides trying to see if it's a good movie or a bad movie, you look at it for the props, and it's like, okay, what's this one going to be? And some movies are like, oh, people talk to one another, they eat food, they drive cars. But then there's some, like The Wrestler, or the one Jeff and I did, I can't remember, before or after, a Michel Gondry movie called Be Kind, Rewind. I guess that would be
before,
after.
I think.
Before?
Oh, was it?
But those, and then I did a kids show many years before that called The Adventures of Pete and Pete. And in each of those cases, you read that, and they're just full of gags. Whether it's somebody gets their head smashed with a window pane, in Be Kind, Rewind, it's just we have to recreate all these movies out of junkyard parts. And that was the thing. Michel Gondry in that movie said, I don't want any props that look like they were made by prop people. I want them to look like somebody went to a dollar store and made these things. And so we literally went to dollar stores, and that became the source of what we made a lot of our props for that movie was. So in a certain way, when you read a script like The Wrestler or Be Kind, Rewind, you go, oh shit, how am I going to do this? You know, that you very often, and again, this is early 2000s. This is before CGI and things. You had to come up with very inventive ways to make things that weren't necessarily physically possible. I just remember that on following whatever, when we did Be Kind, Rewind, just all the things that Jeff had to do to just sort of create out of nothingness and in a way help design the movie, because the props were so essential to the look of that movie and what the design actually was.
Yeah, I remember on Be Kind, Rewind, a lot of the time it would be, hand a Sharpie and a piece of cardboard to Michel, and he would, and a pair of scissors, and he would, make the prop himself, because he wanted it to be handmade. He wanted it a specific way. And at a certain point, sometimes it was just like, you're going to be happier if you just do it yourself. So here's the stuff. Yeah, I have a tuba in my living room that has a mouthpiece made out of cardboard that Michel made for the tuba.
I just remember also, Jeff, when I was with you on Be Kind, Rewind, that I became such a regular at dollar stores in Passaic, New Jersey, and Salvation Armies, that when I would come into those places, I'd hear literally somebody say, "He's here!" Because they knew I was going to spend a couple of $100 in one fell swoop. I would take care of their daily quota by 9 a.m. And yeah, that was just a lot of fun. Not fun for you, but it was fun for me.
Oh, that movie was fun when I stopped caring about Michel yelling at me. When I accepted that that my job is to listen for the words that contain helpful information and filter out the anger and the spittle.
And French, right? He would yell at you in French, right?
No, my favorite time he yelled at me, he said, spitting, "Am I not speaking English?" And afterwards,
honest to God, I had a blast on that movie, and you were the shock absorber for our department.
Oh yeah. Well, at the end of the producer said, "You were a real lightning rod on this job, weren't you?" And it was like, and I think she thought that it was like I wasn't doing a good job or something like that. I think it was more, Michel needed to yell at somebody, and I think he's just used to the prop man. I remember at one point he said, "You are not as bad as my last prop man."
Yeah, and it's just, he has these, he's gifted in that he has extremely unique visions. He creates entire movies, and if you've ever seen his videos too, they're fantastic, but they're things that don't exist on this planet. So your job is to create something that doesn't exist, but you have to interpret that from him. And yeah, there is French in some of the things he'll say. And you do have to just sort of try to physicalize this concept that he has. And I don't think anybody, Jeff, could avoid having been yelled at by Michel Gondry. And the fact that you handled it with such grace, it was remarkable. And sorry to tell you, I had a blast on that movie. I'm sorry you didn't.
Oh no, I feel like I think I did have a blast on it. I don't know. I don't know. I think part of brain damage is helpful as a prop man, because you can go through a really traumatic experience, and then when it's all over, go, "Oh, that wasn't so bad." It really was that bad, I'm afraid.
Well, Jeff, I'm not sure that's unique to props. I think lots and lots of different folks on set will walk away with better memories despite the abuse they suffer. I want to ask you guys a little more in terms of props over the years. As we mentioned, you guys met 30 years ago on Matewan when you're both production assistants. Be Kind, Rewind, you've been talking about, that came out the same year as The Wrestler, so basically a contemporary of that film. But you guys have been working since. And you mentioned earlier how digital has replaced a lot of what used to be practical prop work. What other trends or changes have you guys seen over time with props, or even working with each other? Just give me more of that sense of history of props in general.
the biggest thing is phones. It used to be, before there were cell phones, you'd have to, when actors had a conversation on the phone, you'd have to run them together with what we called a phone ringer. And when you pick up one phone, the other phone will ring. And when the actor picks it up, an actor and an off-camera actor can have a conversation. And so we spent a lot of, people talk on the phones in movies a lot. So we spent a lot of time doing that. Now with cell phones, it's just an entire different thing. They're much more common than phones in general, because people always have them and use them for 19 different things. But I think that strikes me as one of the biggest changes over the years, just in terms of like day to day what we do. Another one would be, like Dan had mentioned, firearms. It used to be, we would handle firearms a lot more. Now, typically, there's an armorer if there's any kind of gunplay, and often the effects, the gun firing and the squib hits are all visual effects that are done later. So it's just much more of an actor holding a gun and saying bang than us having to be worried about gun safety and ear protection and eye protection and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, if you don't mind me bringing it around one more time to Black Swan too, you were talking about phones. When I did Black Swan, there is a scene where Natalie Portman calls her mother, played by Barbara Hershey, to say, "Mom, I can't believe it. I got the part of the White Swan in Swan Lake." It's like the biggest moment in her life. It's what she's been working for this entire time. And this was 2010. I think we used an iPhone or something like that. But it was very, very, very important for Darren to have a real phone connection on that day and to make the arrangements. That Barbara wasn't with us yet. She wouldn't come in until the last 2 weeks of filming. But wherever Barbara was that day that we were going to film it, that she really be on the line with Barbara Hershey playing her mother. And as we put all of this work into it, not just me and making sure the phone worked, because this was still early on when it's like, is this thing going to work? Is it going to work? Yes, we did this whole thing to make it. Now it's much easier. But in 2010, believe it or not, it was a big deal to make this happen. A live cell phone conversation on film was a big deal at that time. And of course, on the day, Barbara Hershey had another commitment. She couldn't do it, and we wound up having the script woman do the reading off camera.
Classic.
Yeah. But in terms of Jeff and my relationship, I mean, after we had both done Matewan, I was still living in West Virginia, and I had made enough money on Matewan that I decided, well, I'm going to move to New York. And as it happened, Jeff.
Well, you won the Mets pool.
Well, I won the Mets pool. That's a whole other thing. I won the crew. The New York Mets and the Boston Red Sox were playing each other in the series in '86, and I never ever bet until the final game, and I wound up winning the whole damn pool. But I made $650 on that. But I had some other money from having worked on it. So I took what money I had. I moved to New York, and I lived with Jeff for 4 years. They had an extra room in their apartment. So when you live with somebody, you really get to know them. We see each other in our best and worst. Jeff got to listen to me sing along to my stereo through the other side of the wall for 4 years and put up with it. So, but just that kind of communication, you can't beat it. I can sense, when I have worked with Jeff, even now I'll come in, I'll day play with him, Madam Secretary or whatever. And when he did that show. And I can just sort of see sometimes, like, okay, Jeff's in a good mood, so I can bring this up, or no, he's serious today. There's big stuff going on. Let's hold off with the jokes, just keep our head down. Or he'll just say to me, like, Fish, can you go to the truck and get this, whatever. And I know where it is on the truck. I've been on that truck so many times. I can do it very quickly because I know where it is, or I know what he's talking about. He and I are both movie fanatics. So if he references a movie, he referenced Taxi Driver, I know what he's talking about, but not everybody, especially these days under the age of 30 or 40, might know that Taxi Driver reference, or the fact that the gun dealer was played by Alan Garfield.
But I think also we're both, filmmaker wannabes. You're a writer, I'm a director, but this is what we do. So I think we're a lot of the people that we're working with. Yeah, I've just run into a prop guy that I've known for a long time who used to give me a hard time because it's like, you guys don't even want to be prop guys, and you guys have the jobs. But I think I think it's something that helps both you and I do the work that we do, and to work together is that we're not looking at it entirely from the perspective of people who just understand the world of props. We're trying to. I think we sort of understand what the filmmakers are trying to do, and we're more method prop guys or something like that, and that we come from hopefully more of the point of view of the people who are making the film than other prop departments might.
Well, that's where you impressed me very early on. Maybe the first movie I was your second on was this thing called 1,000 Pieces of Gold that we filmed in Montana together. And what I remember getting an impression from you was that you put a lot of care into, it wasn't just that you got the props, here's the prop, you put a lot of care and a lot of thought in how that prop looked and how aged or weathered it should be, or things that weren't in the script. What would be useful to that actor for the scene. Even if they chose not to use it, you'd have it on hand. And that made a big impression on me then. And I've tried to live up to that ever since. And then what you said too, both you and I came from an outsider's point of view. When you and I were getting into this, our union at the very least was still very much, if you didn't have a father or an uncle, it was very hard to get in. And there was a second union at that time called NABIT for more of the outsiders, and eventually NABIT and IATSE merged. But I don't think you have any relatives in the business. I don't. We came into it all on our own and just sort of made up our own method and our own rules of how we approach the work.
Well, that's interesting, guys. So someone, if they were interested in starting out in props now, how else is it different? What else should someone do if really they're excited about the things you're talking about and props is where they want to find a movie career?
If you live in New York, you have to be prepared for a long application process. A lot of times 52, our union, doesn't accept applications. And in order to even to apply now, I think you have to take a lift test and some other kind of OSHA test. And then once you've applied, what that qualifies you to do is to work if there are no union people available to work and there's a job. So applicants, a lot of the people that we work with now are applicants because New York is blown up in terms of television.
Pardon me for interrupting, but that's such a different experience than when I came to the city and was living with you. In '86, there was no permit set up. It was you were either in the union and you got union work or you did non-union work. And when I was living with you in Long Island City, Jeff, I would do I did a softcore porn movie. I did whatever it was.
Chuck Vincent.
Yeah, and Chuck Vincent, right. And there were rock videos at that time were still really big. And I'd do those. I'd make as little as $50 a day. The most I made was $200 a day, flat rate, cash, so nobody had to pay taxes. But this idea, like my son now is, and I think your sons are too, my son is on the permit list. I can hire him. He's in grad school right now. I hire him once a week on the job I'm doing now. And he comes in, and after taxes, he's making $300 a day for a 10-hour day. And
right.
That's great. And he's also learning alongside people who really know how to do this work. I'm not just flattering myself. I'm talking about our whole group of people around us. Or, I think your sons worked with you on the Jarmusch movie, right? So they learned from Dad some things that no, good things.
No, I think they learned they don't want to do this. That's what they learned.
Well, that's part of the goal too.
Also a valuable lesson.
Teach your kids, don't go into this business if you don't really want to do it. And no, my son just looks at it like, hey, it's better than working at Cheesecake Factory, where you make $300 a week. Here he can do it. He come in for it, and you get coffee and bagels and free lunch. So this is all good. You and I don't know about you, but I didn't have that opportunity when I first started. And yeah, certainly it's the Wild West right now in New York. There's so many streaming shows and stuff. If you wanted to start out, as you asked Skid about, well, how do I get into this? This is the time, baby. I don't know when it will go bust, but for now it's all boom. And if you want to get into props or grip or camera or anything, or acting, there's more opportunity now. Certainly in New York, and I'm sure in Atlanta and probably LA than there's ever been.
Yeah, these are the days of the lateral move. I just worked with a production manager who didn't seem like they knew what they were doing. And I looked up on IMDb, and they were a production manager on this job, but their last job, they were a production supervisor. And the job before that, they were a production coordinator. So these are moves that in the old days would take a decade, and now they're one movie to the next. People are rising. It's insane. It's a little embarrassing that I'm still a prop guy in the current environment, but that has to do with effort more than anything.
Well, you guys have brought some prop expertise to our listeners today. Well, I don't miss being on set with you guys one bit. I do enjoy talking about the business, and you guys have really brought it today. I really appreciate it. Thanks, guys, for joining me today on Below the Line.
Thanks, Skid.
Thank you, Skid.
Listeners, I'd love to hear what you thought of the episode. You can send an email to skid, S-K-I-D, at belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. I also appreciate your feedback via iTunes, where your ratings and comments really do help us reach new listeners. And Facebook, where, for your visual entertainment, I post photos and other behind-the-scenes materials at Podcast Below the Line. Finally, you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram. It's at Pod Below the Line. Thanks to Curtis Five for our music and John Juan for our logo. The logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Thanks again for listening. Hope you're enjoying our property department deep dives. Join us for another one next week.